Hello, Katie here. Sounds so silly. I'm recording on the other side of my phone, so not the side where you can see yourself, but the other side. And part of me is nervous that this isn't recording, but it's okay. If it's not recording, I'll just get to read twice. So we are reading Ursula K LeGuin's No Time to Spare. We're on About Anger, page 136, October 2014. And the light will probably change. The sun's just coming up. It's about 7 o'clock. Servo indignatio, or indignatio. Sewa? Maybe it's Latin. In the consciousness-raising days of the second wave of feminism, we made a big deal out of anger, the anger of women. We praised it and cultivated it as a virtue. We learned to boast of being angry, to swagger our rage, to play the fury. We were right to do so. We were telling women who believed they should patiently endure insults, injuries, and abuse that they had every reason to be angry. We were rousing people to feel and see injustice, the methodical mistreatment to which women were subjected, the almost universal disrespect of the human rights of women, and to resent and refuse it for themselves and for others. Indignation, forcibly expressed, is an appropriate response to injustice. Indignation draws strength from outrage, and outrage draws strength from rage. There is a time for anger, and that was such a time. Anger is a useful, perhaps indispensable tool in motivating resistance to injustice. But I think it is a weapon, a tool useful only in combat and self-defense. People to whom male dominance is important or essential fear women's resistance, therefore women's anger. They know a weapon when they see one. The backlash from them was immediate and predictable. Those who see human rights as consisting of men's rights labeled every woman who spoke up for justice as a man-hating, bra-burning, intolerant shrew. With much of the media supporting their view, they successfully degraded the meaning of the words feminism and feminist, identifying them with intolerance to the point of making them almost useless, even now. The far right likes to see everything in terms of warfare. If you look at the feminism of 1960 to 1990 that way, you might say it worked out rather like the Second World War. The people who lost it gained a good deal in the end. These days, overt male dominance is less taken for granted. The gender gap in take-home pay is somewhat narrower. There are more women in certain kinds of high positions, particularly in higher education, within certain limits and in certain circumstances. Girls can act uppity and women can assume equality with men without risk. As the old ad with the cocky bimbo smoking a cigarette said, "You've come a long way, baby." Oh, gee, thanks, boss. Thanks for the lung cancer, too. Perhaps, to follow the nursery metaphor instead of the battlefield one, if feminism was the baby, she's now grown past the stage where her only way to get attention to her needs and wrongs was anger tantrums, acting out, kicking ass. In the cause of gender rights, mere anger now seldom proves a useful tool. Indignation is still the right response to indignity, to disrespect. But in the present moral climate, it seems to be most effective expressed through steady, resolute, morally committed behavior and action. This is clearly visible in the issue of abortion rights, where the steadfast nonviolence of rights defenders faces the rants, threats, and violence of rights opponents. The opponents would welcome nothing so much as violence in return. If NARAL vented rage as Tea Party spokesmen do, if the clinics banished guns to defend them, if the clinics brandished guns to defend themselves from the armed demonstrators, the opponents of abortion rights on the Supreme Court would hardly have to bother dismantling Roe v. Wade by degrees as they're doing. The cause would be already lost. As it is, it may suffer a defeat, but if we who support it hold firm, it will never be lost. Anger points powerfully to the denial of rights, but the exercise of rights can't live and thrive on anger. It lives and thrives on the dogged pursuit of justice. If women who value freedom are dragged back into open conflict with oppression, forced to defend themselves against the reimposition of unjust laws, we will have to call on anger as a weapon again, but we're not at that point yet, and I hope nothing we do now brings us closer to it. Anger continued on past its usefulness becomes unjust, then dangerous. Nursed for its own sake, valued as an end in itself, it loses its goal. It fuels not positive activism, but regression, obsession, vengeance, self-righteousness. Corrosive, it feeds off itself, destroying its host in the process. The racism, misogyny, and counter-rationality of the reactionary right in American politics for the last several years is a frightening exhibition of the destructive force of anger, deliberately nourished by hate, encouraged to rule thought, and invited to control behavior. I hope our republic survives this orgy of self-indulgent rage. Private anger. I've been talking about what might be called public anger, political anger, but I went on thinking about the subject as a personal experience, getting mad, being angry. And I find the subject very troubling because though I want to see myself as a woman of strong feeling but peaceable instincts, I have to realize how often anger fuels my acts and thoughts, how very often I indulge in anger. I know that anger can't be suppressed indefinitely without crippling or corroding the soul. But I don't know how useful anger is in the long run. Is private anger to be encouraged? Considered a virtue given free expression at all times, as we wanted women's anger against injustice to be, what would it do? Certainly an outburst of anger can cleanse the soul and clear the air, but anger nursed and nourished begins to act like an anger suppressed. It begins to poison the air with vengefulness, spitefulness, distrust, breeding grudge and resentment, brooding endlessly over the causes of the grudge, the righteousness of the resentment. A brief, open expression of anger in the right moment, aimed at its true target, is effective. Anger is a good weapon, but a weapon is appropriate too, justified only by a situation of anger. Nothing justifies cowing the family every night with rage at the dinner table, or using a tantrum to settle the argument about what TV channel to watch, or expressing frustration by tailgating and then passing on the right at 80 miles an hour yelling, "Fuck you!" Perhaps the problem is this. When threatened, we pull out our weapon, anger. Then the threat passes or evaporates, but the weapon is still in our hand. And weapons are seductive, even addictive. They promise to give us strength, security, dominance. Looking for positive sources or aspects of my own anger, I recognized one: self-respect. When slighted or patronized, I flare up in fury and attack, right then, right there. I have no guilt about that, but then so often it turns out to have been a misunderstanding. The disrespect was not intended, or was mere clumsiness perceived as a slight. And even if it was intended, so what? As my great Aunt Betsy said of a woman who snubbed her, I pity her poor taste. Mostly my anger is connected less with self-respect than with negatives: jealousy, hatred, fear. Fear in a person of my temperament is endemic and inevitable. And I can't do much about it except recognize it for what it is and try not to let it rule me entirely. If I'm in an angry mood and aware of it, I can ask myself, so what is it you're afraid of? That gives me a place to look at my anger from. Sometimes it helps get me into clearer air. Jealousy sticks its nasty yellow-green snout mostly into my life as a writer. I'm jealous of other writers who soar to success on wings of praise. I'm contemptuously angry at them, at the people who praise them, if I don't like their writing. I'd like to kick Ernest Hemingway for faking and posturing when he had the talent to succeed without faking. I snarl at what I see as the unending overestimation of James Joyce. The enshrinement of Philip Roth infuriates me. But all this jealous anger happens only if I don't like what they write. If I like a writer's writing, praise of that writer makes me happy. I can read endless appreciations of Virginia Woolf. A good article about Jose Saramago makes my day. So evidently, the cause of my anger isn't so much jealousy or envy as, once again, fear. Fear that if Hemingway, Joyce, and Roth really are the greatest, there's no way I can ever be very good or very highly considered as a writer, because there's no way I am ever going to write anything like what they write or please the readers and critics they please. The circular silliness of this is self-evident, but my insecurity is incurable. Fortunately, it operates only when I read about writers I dislike, never when I'm actually writing. When I'm at work on a story, nothing could be farther from my mind than anybody else's stories or status or success. Anger's connection with hatred is surely very, very complicated, and I don't understand it at all, but again, fear seems to be involved. If you aren't afraid of someone or something threatening or unpleasant, you can, as a rule, despise it, ignore it, or even forget it. If you fear it, you have to hate it. I guess hatred uses anger as fuel. I don't know. I don't really like going to this place. What I'm coming away from it with, though, seems to be a pervasive idea that anger is connected with fear. My fears come down to fear of not being safe, as if anyone is ever safe, and not being in control, as if I was ever in control. Does the fear of being unsafe and not in control express itself as anger, or does it use anger as a kind of denial of the fear? One view of clinical depression explains it as sourced in suppressed anger. Anger turned perhaps against the self because fear of being harmed or fear of doing harm, prevents the anger from turning against the people or circumstances causing it. If so, no wonder a lot of people are depressed, and no wonder so many of them are women. They are living with an unexploded bomb. So how do you defuse the bomb, or when and how can you explode it safely, even usefully? A psychologist once informed my mother that a child should not be punished in anger. To be useful, he said, punishment must be administered calmly, with a clear and rational explanation to the child of the cause of punishment. Never strike a child in anger, he said. It sounded so right, my mother said to me, but then I thought, was he telling me to hit a kid when I'm not angry? This was shortly after my daughter Caroline, a sweet-natured, affectionate 2-year-old, came up to me while the family was sitting around on a terrace outside my parents' house. She smiled up at me rather uncertainly and bit me hard on the leg. My left arm swung out and full backhanded knocked her away like a fly. She was unhurt but enormously surprised. There were then, of course, many tears, many hugs, many consolations. There were no apologies on either side. I only got guilty about hitting her later. That was terrible, I said to my mother. I didn't think, I just whacked her. My mother then told me about what the psychologist had told her, and she said, when your brother Clifton was 2, he bit me, and he kept doing it. I didn't know what to do. I thought I shouldn't punish him. Finally, I just blew up. I slapped him. He was so surprised, like Caroline, I don't think he even cried, and he stopped biting. If there is a moral to this tale, I don't know what it is. Don't hit your babies. I see in the lives of people I know how crippling a deep and deeply suppressed anger is. It comes from pain and it causes pain. Maybe the prolonged festival of cruelty going on in our literature and movies is an attempt to get rid of repressed anger by expressing it, acting it out symbolically. Kick everybody's ass all the time, torture the torturer, describe every agony, blow up everything over and over. Does this orgy of simulated or virtual violence relieve anger or increase the leaden inward load of fear and pain that causes it? For me, the latter. It makes me sick and scares me. Anger that targets everything and everybody indiscriminately is the futile, infantile, psychotic rage of the man with an automatic rifle shooting preschoolers. I can't see it as a way of life, even pretended life. You hear the anger in my tone? Anger indulged rouses anger, yet anger suppressed breeds anger. What is the way to use anger to fuel something other than hurt? To direct it away from hatred, vengefulness, self-righteousness, and make it serve creation and compassion. Love it. I forgot what I was going to say. I'll just keep going. The Annals of Pard. An Unfinished Education. July 2015. Last Thursday night, Pard woke me up about 3 a.m. by bringing his real-life mouse toy onto the bed so I could play with it too. This was the third time he's done it, always about 3 in the morning. For the third time, having had some practice, I flung both cat and mouse off the bed with a giant convulsion of bedclothes. Both cat and mouse went right on running briskly around the room. Scrabble, scrabble, silent, scutter, scamper, skit, silent, scrabble. This time I didn't stick it out at all. I fled down the hall to another bedroom and shut the door. In the morning, Pard was walking up and down the hall, all bright and innocent, and wondering why I was in that bedroom. No sign of mouse. Last time there never was any sign of what became of mouse. I assumed it escaped that time and this time. But Friday night, Pard woke me up about 3 a.m. by rummaging persistently at the base of the standing lamp in my bedroom, making annoying noises and worrying me that he'd knock the lamp over, even though the base is a big, heavy brass disc. No way to go back to sleep with that going on. I picked him up and shut him out of the room. There's no use trying to shut out both Pard and a mouse, because the door is so high off the floor that the mouse can run back in, leaving Pard out, and then Pard will rattle the door and cry. And this time, when I shut him out, Pard just went down the hall to sleep. But this time, when I shut him out, Pard just went down the hall to sleep in the other bedroom. This told me indirectly something about the mouse. Pard is an excellent hunter, but as I said in an earlier blog, he doesn't know that he should kill the prey, nor evidently does he know how to. His instincts and skills are impeccably feline, but his education was incomplete. Saturday morning, once I was up, dressed, and more or less competent, I lifted the heavy lamp base and looked under it. Sure enough, the poor little dead mouse was there, in its last refuge. Injury, terror, exhaustion, all can be mortal. Oh. I wrote a poem for the mouse. I'm not sure it's finished yet. I keep moving lines and changing bits of it, but here it is in its current form. Words for the dead. Mouse my cat killed, gray scrap in a dustpan, carried to the trash. To your soul I say, with none to hide from, run now, dance. Inside the walls of the great house, into your body, inside the body of the great earth, is unbounded being. Be still. Very sweet. Okay. I'll keep going. We're almost at the end of part 3. An Unfinished Education continued. January 2016. We were reading Penelope Fitzgerald's The Beginning of Spring aloud before dinner last night when Pard came trotting through the living room in an uncharacteristically feral way. Body low to the ground, tail down, head poised, eyes all black pupil, and sure enough, a small mouse in his mouth. He put it down, let it go, recaught it, and trotted on back to the kitchen. the tiny black tail hanging out of his mouth, he went on grimly with Penelope. We went on grimly with Penelope. After a while, Pard came back, mouseless, and looking clueless. He wandered off, and we decided, or hoped, he'd lost the mouse. Just as we were about to do dishes, he reappeared with it. It was now distinctly less alive, but still alive. Less active, but still alive. Pard was confused, troubled, and purposeless, as he always is when he has caught a mouse, totally possessed by the instinctive command to hunt, to catch, to bring the catch to the family as a trophy or toy or food, but lacking any instinct or instruction as to how to follow through to the kill. A cat with a mouse, the cliché example of cruelty. I want to say clearly that I do not believe any animal is capable of being cruel. Cruelty implies consciousness of another's pain and the intent to cause it. Cruelty is a human specialty, which human beings continue to practice and perfect and institutionalize, though we seldom boast about it. We prefer to disown it, calling it inhumanity, ascribing it to animals. We don't want to admit the innocence of animals, which reveals our guilt. It's possible that I could have caught the mouse and taken it outside to spare it some suffering. Charles couldn't, because after an operation a while ago, he's forbidden to stoop down. I didn't even try. To do it, I'd have to be highly motivated, and I'm not. I feel neither guilty nor ashamed of that, only unhappy about the whole situation. I've never been able to come between a cat and its prey. When I was 12 or so, our tomcat caught a sparrow on the lawn. 2 of my brothers and my father were there. All 3 shouted at the cat, tried to get the bird away from it, and succeeded in a cloud of feathers and confusion. I recall clearly because I was clearly aware of my own feelings at the time. My refusal to join the shouting and scolding and scrambling, I disapproved. I thought the matter was between the bird and the cat, and we had no business interfering with it. This may appear very cold-blooded, and perhaps it is. There are certain other matters of life and death toward which I have a similarly instant, absolute, imperative response. It is right to do this or wrong to do this, which is not affected by personal preference or tenderness, has nothing to do with the reasonings of conscience, and cannot be justified by the arguments of ordinary mortality, but neither can it be shaken by them. Our feeble solution to Pard and the mouse's problem was to shut them into the kitchen, leaving them to work it out in their own way, and the dishes to be done in the morning. What the mouse needed was to find the hole he'd come in by. Pard's box is in the kitchen porch. Pard's box is in the kitchen porch, and his water bowl on the kitchen floor, so Pard had all he needed. Plus his problem. Never heard of a kitchen porch. I guess I have a friend who has a kitchen porch. That's funny. And minus us, he is a very human-dependent cat. He's almost always unobtrusively nearby. Fits of flying about at eye level, wreaking sudden havoc on bedspreads, galloping madly up flights of stairs, and bouncing backward, stiff-legged and humpbacked, with enormous tail and glaring eyes down the hall ahead of you for no reason, occur now and then, but mostly he's just quiet somewhere near one or the other of us, keeping an eye on us or sleeping. Right now, he's conked out on his beloved Mobius scarf right next to the time machine, about 18 inches from my right elbow. Nights he almost always spends on my bed, around the vicinity of my knees. So I knew I'd miss him last night, and he'd miss me, as we did. And we did. I got up to pee around 2 a.m. and could just hear him weeping softly down the kitchen. All the way home from the Humane Society in the carrier, he meowed and yowled lustily, but since then, he's never raised his voice. Even when shut by mistake in the basement, he just stands at the door and cries softly, meow, until somebody happens to hear him. I steeled my heart, went back to bed, and felt bad till 3:30. In the morning, getting dressed, I heard again, so I dressed fast, hurried down, and opened the kitchen door. There was Pard, still puzzled, still anxious, but tail in the air to greet me and breakfast. There was no mouse. These chapters of the saga almost always end now in mystery, an unhappy mystery, a result maybe of the only partly worked out relationship between two immensely different ways of being, the human and the feline. Wild cat and wild mouse have a clear, highly developed, well-understood connection, predator and prey, but Pard's and his ancestors' relationship with human beings has interfered with his instincts, confusing that fierce clarity, half taming it, leaving him and his prey in an unsatisfactory, unhappy place. People and dogs have been shaping each other's character and behavior for 30,000 years. People and cats have been working at transforming each other only for a tenth that long. We are still in the early stages. Maybe that's why it's so interesting. Oh, but I forgot the weird part. After I'd hurried downstairs this morning, as I got to the kitchen door, I saw a triangle of white on the floor under it, a piece of paper. A message had been shoved under the door. I stood and stared at it. Was it going to say, "Please let me out," in cat? I picked it up and saw a friend's telephone number scribbled in pencil. The scrap of paper had fallen off the telephone table in the kitchen hall. Pard was still saying, "You," very politely behind the door, so I opened it and we had our reunion. Doggerel for my cat. His paws are white, his ears are black. When he isn't around, I feel the lack. His purr is loud, his fur is soft. He always carries his tail aloft. His gait is easy, his gaze intense. He wears a tuxedo to all events. His toes are prickly, his nose is pink. I want to watch him sit and think. His breed is Allie, his name is Pard. Life without him would be hard. Oh, and she has a little picture of him. Sweet. Okay, I'm gonna pause there and then we'll do part 4. Bye.